All right, man. The cleaning crew is in the house, and we're going to clean it all up today. We're going to make it clear and crystal clean.
Clean, crystal clear with limited expletives so we can keep it nice and clean for you and your kids. Folks, it's April 20th, the year
Limited.
2023. Welcome aboard, everybody. You're listening to the Crushing Iron podcast, and this is episode 678.
You cleaning up your act over there?
Clean,
no expletives?
Nah, I didn't say no expletives. I said limited expletives, but I will try and keep them on the minimum today. So for those of you that are listening on the car ride to and from school or after school sports with your kids, they don't have to wear their earmuffs today. They can just kind of keep things rolling and hopefully gain some wisdom in their youth sports for what we do as a hobby as adults. And having said that, it's your first time tuning in today. Welcome. We appreciate you giving us your time. We know you have quite a lot of options in the triathlon podcast universe, and just podcasts in general. Time is very valuable, so we appreciate you tuning in today. We cover it all. We do swim, bike, and run specific podcasts. We do race recaps and also a lot of race previews. But for the most part, Mike and I, as coaches, athletes, best friends, we just sit back, relax, have an open, honest discussion about what we're going through in life, not just as human beings, but also as coaches and athletes ourselves. We also talk frequently about what our own athletes are going through. Mike and I work with a very wide range of athletes all across the globe, from beginner level triathletes looking at the very first 5K or sprint triathlon, all the way up through elite level amateurs trying to get back to world championships, and everyone in between from all over the globe. And we use the feedback loop we have with them and Training Peaks emails, text messages, and the like to drive the discussion today. We also utilize our Facebook group. You can search that, Crushing Iron Group. Answer one simple question. We'll let you right in. Awesome people, fantastic community, solid resource in a sport that's oftentimes way overcomplicated and can be very confusing. We offer a solid space for information and a bunch of, again, experienced sage triathletes who have been around the block, willing to offer their expertise and hopefully help you avoid some of the pitfalls and obstacles we've all had along our own individual journeys. But that's it. We don't do sponsors. We most certainly don't do ads, but we do have an agenda, and that's to keep you happy and healthy in your endurance sports journey.
Hey, don't most kids have their own headsets or iPads or iPods in the car anyway? So they're listening to something else. They're not listening to this podcast.
I'm pretty sure they do, but Hayden does not. I don't know. And don't get me wrong here, and this is not about to be a parenting podcast because screen time has its place for everybody, but he doesn't do the iPad. And don't get me wrong, sometimes I want him to because the kid never shuts his mouth. He talks 24/7. From the time he wakes up, from the time he goes to bed, he talks. Last night, perfect example. Getting his helmet on for hockey, and I'm like, hey, once you move up to the U8, like you got to start wearing a mouthpiece. You want to wear it tonight? No, because that means I can't talk to anyone. Enough said. Okay, enough said. But yeah, I think a lot of kids are probably zoned out with their own earphones, watching stuff in the car. But
so you make him listen to like Joe Filio and stuff like that all the time.
He's either listening to, we're either having a conversation, or about God knows what, or he's listening to 90s alternative. That's the option. Oh. It's either 90s alternative, 80s or rock classics on Spotify, or we're having, whatever random thing is going through your average 6-year-old mind, which is, who knows what, any given day, which is also the fun of it. But yeah, it has its challenges, just like all things in life. Speaking of challenges, I want to give a quick shout out to everybody doing Ironman Texas this weekend. That's on Saturday. The weather has gone up a little bit, so let that be a lesson to you. Don't check the weather too far out, but it still looks like an amazing day out at Ironman Texas. That's on Saturday, the first North American Ironman of the year, and what might be one of the very few early season Ironmans, as they've recently announced they're canceling Ironman Tulsa. No shocker, because nobody ever went and raced, but I also think that's because that's a third weekend in May. That's the same weekend as Ironman Chattanooga 70.3, but I believe Des Moines is alternating back and forth. So last year that was a full, this year it's a half, and that's like, I think second weekend in June. So that kind of goes in the same time frame. I think that race was actually pretty successful. So I think will be slated to be a full next year. And then for all the athletes down there doing rocking the short course at USAT Multisport Nationals in Irvine, Texas, which is basically Dallas. They got started yesterday with the open water swim race. You got sprint triathlon, sprint duathlon. You got draft legal racing. It really does look like a really fun weekend. I'd love to be a part of it at some point. And then a big shout out to Matt Clark, one of our athletes who won his age group this morning at in the sprint distance event. So a really awesome performance from him.
Nice work, buddy.
Yeah, he's seriously one of incredible athlete, but even better dude, as you will attest. The guy is solid, probably the finest man in Baltimore. I'm just going to say it right now. Probably, sorry, Ray Lewis, one of the finest men in Cal.
Ray Lewis.
Ray Lewis, one of the finest
Cal Ripken, man,
in Baltimore. But yeah, again, congrats to him, and again, let that be a. I think oftentimes we get very caught up in, mid distance, full distance, and the athletes that we coach. But we coach everybody with all kinds of dreams and aspirations and goals. And he's a short course focused guy and a short course beast. So awesome work from Matt. I'm pretty sure it qualifies him for Team USA. So a little bit of a humble brag for him because he won't do it himself. But yeah, awesome stuff. And again, very exciting times, and what looks like a pretty cool weekend of all different kinds of events that you can do back to back to back. They got a mixed relay, so I'm not sure where it'll be next year if they'll do it again, but I'd love to be a part of something like that in the future.
Well, what was his name? That Mayor Barry seemed like a hell of a guy in Baltimore.
Mayor Barry, I have no idea who that even is, but yeah. Listen, I doubt that, being the finest man in Illinois or in Illinois, Baltimore is, that much of a hard thing to accomplish, but he's a salt of the earth. He's a solid individual. Speaking of solid, I believe our topic today is quite solid. The last few podcasts have been probably heavily focused on things from the chin up. And I, want to say out of the gate, a big thank you to athletes that either posted in the Facebook group or emailed us individually or collectively about, how those podcasts have helped you out. I'll be honest, from a podcast, perspective, it's, it is a triathlon related podcast, as we say all the time. And there's only so much you can talk about specific training, physiology and methods and or even if you're a guest, generated podcast, there's only so many people you can have on that are relevant in the endurance sports world. And we always veer off, right? And veer off on purpose because we believe it's helpful and go in the emotional and mental route. And so it's really, really great. I got an email this morning from an athlete that has an amazing story and just letting us know how those types of podcasts help them manage life and manage expectations and manage development and manage the success, but also, when things, when we feel like we fail, and that's a huge piece of life and managing how we fail and how we succeed and then how we respond. And so again, I want to think about that, but also that goes towards kind of the topic of the day, right? Is we talked a little bit before we went live today about workouts and how athletes are obsessed with adhering to the perfect workout and the perfect amount of threshold intervals or 3x8, and I got to do 3x8 because I can't do 4x6 because it won't be good enough, and how we measure ourselves and what we see as success and how we feel this innate responsibility and pressure, right? That's coupled with an expectation of whether you're a coached athlete, you're working off a training plan that you bought, you've read a book and you're creating your own plan. Is athletes are very, we either don't start it because we can't do it, or we see it through even if we shouldn't, right? Very few athletes have that governor and that perspective inside or objective mentality that says, I can't do, if I've got scheduled a 90-minute ride today with, 2 18-minute intervals at threshold, I can't do that today, so I'm just going to skip it, right? So we don't allow ourselves these, a bail switch, if you will, to bail out, which really isn't, and I make the emphasis using the word bail, right? By bailing out or by and not using the word fail, because I think that's what a lot of people hear when they see a workout listed. It's an hour, and you talk about this more than I do, about how proud and how happy you are when you see athletes have a yellow, right, or an orange. Like in Training Peaks, when you have a hour and a half scheduled, and you do within, I think, 85% of the prescribed session, you get a green. But below that, you get yellow, right? For some reason, if you don't do any yellow, you get a red. Over that, I believe, is orange. Anyway, it's color coded, which is a choice. You don't have to have those, just for the record. But yellow to me and to you shows intent, right? I got in when I got in, right? Or I stopped short, right? Because I feel like it was too much. And so today I wanted to talk about measuring yourself and deciding how much is enough versus doing what you think has to be done. In different ways you can set yourself up for success. Again, whether you're a coached athlete, whether you're an athlete that coaches themselves, working up a training plan, to provide you some useful ways and the reasoning behind them to maybe set yourself up for a lot more successful workouts, not only from the physiological standpoint, but also from the chin up, where you feel like you've succeeded, you feel like you've done the work required, and the most important thing is to create more autonomy in yourself. Again, whether you're a coached athlete or not, every athlete should take as much ownership as they can over each and every session and their entire build up to a race, and not just do what the coach says. You should have autonomy, you should take responsibility, and you should have ownership.
Yeah, and I like this topic because we were talking about it beforehand, but you've kind of put a little definition on it, which I think is awesome, because I'm always talking about that. And we, refer to the integrity of the workout a lot. And, like, I'm a master of that. I'll see something, and if I feel great, I might do a little more or hit it a little harder or whatever. But if I'm not feeling great, I'll get on there and kind of just do the best I got right then. And not only that, see how it unfolds. That's why I love that yellow stuff, is because at least, yeah, like you said, it's an intent, and you just never know until you get on. And normally, I don't know, for me, I can only speak for me usually, but like the hardest part is getting on that bike or whatever. The hardest part is getting on the shoes. We always talk about that. And I really believe that. And just kind of moving out the door, or doing whatever you take, filling the water bottles, all that shit, kind of like that can be, what do they call that? Like what's Pressfield's thing? Damn it. Anyway, so it's just something that can get in the way of actually making a decision and making something happen. So I love it when people get out there, because I see this all the time too, is that I just didn't have it. I thought I didn't have it, and then I got on it, and somehow, like 45 minutes or an hour into it, I felt great. So, I have, personal history with these types of things. And I think that this is really important to look at the stuff you're going to be talking about here, because it's, you have, like, what'd you say? You either you don't get in, or you go too far or whatever. And I think that's it's a huge piece of this puzzle. We have to, go to where we're at and not go over, but also give yourself a chance to get somewhere. It's like this fine line in there always, and it's a gray area, but like, how can we enhance that gray area to make it a little clearer? So I think this is pretty cool to think about.
Yeah. And before we even get into it, I mean, I think one of the biggest reasons that this is even becoming more and more important for athletes to have in their weekly sessions and in their blocks is because it requires, again, this might scare a lot of you, and some of you might opt out immediately, but it requires you to think and feel, not to be a robot, not to be a slave to the session. It requires you to think and feel. A lot of athletes now don't want that, right? And I get it, right? I get it in some aspects of life. You have to think, right? You have to feel ready. You just want to do a session and do it. You want, I want you to write out 20 minutes at exactly 180 watts, and I want to do 10 by 2-minute efforts at exactly 230. I don't want you big or much. I want to do it. I want to put it in ERG mode, and that's fine. But again, I get that for some athletes on some occasions, but not always. And that's become more of the standard. Athletes are becoming more and more distanced from feeling how, what's good, what's not so good, what is my, what kind of leg fatigue do I have, what feels like enough, right? And then they expect to go into race day and be able to feel their way through and manage expectations and manage intensity and manage effort when on the biggest, most important day, they can't, and they expect to do it then when they don't practice it in sessions, right? And so I'll give a few examples here of ways to set yourself up for success, and a few of the athletes, a few of the workouts that I've created and been doing since the start of this year. We kind of revamped the way that we've done things and provided some athletes with opportunities to be, because again, when it comes to coaching, when it comes to the athlete experience, you, the athlete, right, you have the responsibility of making the session of what it is. I can put in 90 minutes. You could do 90 minutes, but you could do it lazy, right? Or you could go too hard. That's up to you, right? The athlete. And so a lot of this is about creating an experience where it raises the stakes on athlete ownership. It raises the stakes for athlete autonomy, which I think is great, right? So here's an example. I write, Mike, I'm working on your week. And I know that this week, based on where we are, in our training blocks, I want you to do, I want you to get in on this Tuesday bike session. I want you to get in 30 minutes, right? In and around 30 minutes of threshold, right? So anything around 92% to 98%, or depending on where we are, it might be 95 to 103. Okay. So that's 30, you could do 3 by 10, right? It's very, very, very simple. But when you think about, again, and a lot of athletes see that, right? If you're an athlete that's a coached athlete, you're an athlete that's coaches yourself or working off a training plan, you see 3 by 10 and your immediate thought, which is this is a total, one of those kind of like fake news things people I think don't understand or might not fully understand when it comes to how your body works, is that yes, the length of an interval is important, right? But it doesn't make or break a workout, right? So if I want Mike to do 30 minutes of threshold intervals, the likelihood is that 24 to 32 is still good enough, right? We always talk about minimal effective dose. We talk about, is doing what is enough, not more, because that's when you start to dig a hole. So what I like to do is I like to give Mike the opportunity and just kind of tie it up. I'm like, all right, Mike, today I want you to get in again, if my goal for it is to him to get 30, right? I might say, in the title of the workout, I might say, all right, Mike, the goal for today is to get anywhere between 22 and 32 minutes of threshold work, right? And I'll break it down into 3 by 10, but I'll write in there options for what we call bailouts, right? Or, to make it to where it goes to 22 minutes, or we'll call it 21 for ease of math, right? So he can, instead of doing 3 by 10, he could do 3 by 7, right? But the great thing about that is, and I'll talk more in detail here in a second, though, is the great thing about that is Mike sees 3 by 10 and his legs might feel like total crap, right? This is me cleaning up the podcast today for you kids. I got you in the back seat. Is you might think, all right, 3 by 10, I don't have that in me today. I don't know that I can mentally go 10 minutes at threshold, because I just my days running, my mind is hard, man. I'm just got a lot of mental and emotional stuff going on today. I just don't know that I can dig deep for that long. You immediately have a reason to not do it. I can't do 3 by 10. I can't do the workout. I definitely can't do 30 minutes at threshold. I think I'm just going to skip it. But if Mike knows, all right, well, I just got 22 minutes in there and I can break it up however I want to break it up, then maybe I shoot for 24 minutes, on the low end, and maybe I do 12 2-minute intervals, right? So you get on the bike, you do your warm up, you do a little bit of a ramp to get your juice flowing. Then you might think, man, I kind of feel okay. You get to 2 minutes, you're like, I can probably go 3. I can probably go 4, 5 minutes. You know what? I think 6 is about right for today. Lap it at 6, right? Now I got 18 minutes left. I'd like to get in. Take your recovery, build it in. Still feeling one, successful, right? And taking ownership of it and waiting till you figured out what you really have for the day to decide if you can or can't do it or not, right? He might find that after his third interval of 6, right, he's got 18 minutes, that he feels really, 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 really good. Well, now here comes the autonomy part of where putting decision making to your athlete's hands is very important, right? This isn't a new thing. A lot of professional coaches do this with their pro athletes or ITU level athletes, is teaching yourself a lesson on what feels like enough. And I'll say this in the session: when you get done today, this should have felt appropriately challenging or somewhat hard. So you as an athlete have to decide when is enough, what is too much, right? And some of you might be thinking, well, isn't that a coach's job to tell you? No. It's our job to outline best case scenario. But guess what? And for professional athletes, that's easy, right? Even then, it's not that easy. That's why they get, they don't get as much of a script as you might think, because you have to understand what you're going through. And I talked about from the chin up what that might feel like. Same goes for the chin down. You wake up, your legs don't feel good. You open up your app, your training plan, or you walk by your refrigerator and see it's taped. And you're like, I can't do that today, right? But if you have options, right, or a bailout, to know it, right? So do the exact same thing I talked about before. Having said that, what you also have is the opposite, right? So I tell Mike, all right, dude, I want 30 minutes of threshold today, and I want you to end this workout feeling like it was somewhat challenging. Well, what if Mike had, a great night of sleep? What if he ate great? What if he's feeling just on point today?
Yep.
Well, after the first interval goes and the 8-minute goes, he's like, you know what? I think I can go longer today. Let me see and kind of test myself, see how long I go. So instead of stopping at 10, he goes to 12 or 14, and maybe he stops at 16. Well, now we know all we got to do is 16 more minutes left, and he could do, 16 minutes this interval. He could go 10 minutes on the next one, and then he could do 6 minutes at the end, right? Bridging his way down, listening to his body, not doing too much, and then still ending up at 32, right? So it gives you a range, right? Not just in the range in the interval, right? 95%, 102%, maybe 92 to 98, whatever it is. And it also gives you a minute, right? So if you think about the distribution and its intensity, the important thing, and I think this is very, it needs to be very clear, and every athlete that's listening to this needs to understand, is that we as coaches gain more information about you as an athlete on your own personal choices and then your description. So you telling us what you're feeling that day, because is tells us so much about how the training load is going, where your mental space is. Like, so when you give athletes choices, they think it's a trick question, but it's not. It's called gathering intel, right? About where they are mentally, emotionally, and the most important, where they are physically. And it allows you to own that session and show that and feel that, and then also be the gauge of, does 92% feel good today? Does 100% feel good today? And the fact is yes, sometimes you might suck at it, to be frank. You might go way over, but guess what? You'll learn the lesson the next morning when you wake up too sore to do the next workout, right? And then the next time you'll do a better job of listening to your body, understanding what's enough, and also realizing the importance of connecting things in a chain. And I just think it's very, very, and we'll talk about running here in a minute and even swimming, but I think it's just very, very important for athletes to understand that and to own their experience and to own their sessions and their training blocks, because no one knows exactly what's going to happen. No one. No one can predict it. No bot, no chat GPT, no artificial intelligence app. No coach can tell exactly what you can do the next day. Obviously, the goal is to give you something that we predict will be very manageable for you to be able to do, and you can do it well. But then again, by the time when you write it the week before, or even check in the day before, a lot of things happen, and a lot of life happens, and a lot of fueling happens, a lot of lack of sleep or more sleep happens, or less stress or more stress happens, right? That you have to know how to feel, and you have to own it. And I think that's, again, a lot of athletes don't want that, but the ones that do understand the importance of owning their own journey, of owning their own improvement, and then also being better prepared for managing those on race day.
Well, first of all, thank you for giving me that choice with my workout. I really appreciate that.
I got your back, man. I've learned a few things over the last 10 years of what you want to do and how you want to roll.
You can massage my ego. Second of all, I probably would never start out with 16, and I would go the other way. I would always probably start with 2 and see how that went, and then go to 5 and whatever. Because maybe I'm different than most people. We used to have people come into the hub sometimes and get ready for their FTP test or something like that. They get on the bike and they would just be screaming right out of the gate. I'm like, what the hell's going on It's like certain people just are ready to go. And I'm like that guy that has to be in the easiest gear and just spin and get my butt settled and, like take some time. But I think that's important, man, to really know who you are and think about these workouts like that, because, I always say it's like you got to own your sessions, like what you said. And it always is different, man. It's like there are people, and I'm sure they probably get sick of hearing us talk about this kind of stuff because they just get on and do their stuff and they nail it and whatever, and everything's perfect in their life and they have, great flowers in their yard and everything's just great. But most people have challenges, and I just think whether it's, do you need a little bit longer of a warm up or whatever the case may be. And of course, that was something you also said to me earlier, was that, hey, sometimes you just need a little more time on that warm up to get going. And, or maybe that first interval isn't as intense as you think it might be or hope it could be. And you take a little time with that. So this stuff, I really do think that, certain times we talk about things, and I think this is one of those deals where we really need to kind of hit home with, because I think most of my athletes are actually really good at this, because sometimes they just don't feel something, but they get there and then it kind of comes together at some point, and that's really all I'm looking for. I mean, you got to be the best you can be, and not every day is going to be perfect, but if you get in and give it an effort, you just never know. I mean, it really is that thing about how fatigue builds over time, and you might not think you have it, man, but it just takes longer to warm up or to get your legs going. And how many times, man, an hour and a half into a ride, you're like, man, I don't have it today, and all of a sudden you start feeling better as you get to 2 hours. And how do you reconcile that in your brain? Because it's your body's telling you one thing, but then all of a sudden, wow, then all of a sudden you go out and you ride 2 more hours and you feel great. So this kind of thing, it just kind of weaves its way through everything to me. No matter how you're feeling, you got to kind of explore and see what that is.
There's another workout that, and I think it's great for pacing strategy and then knowing effort and how long you can stay. I mean, going back to, I think it's like into 2020, 2021, I was in probably some of the best cycling shape of my life. And some of my best rides were like straight 60-minute at threshold, right? My start of the workout, the intent was to only go for 25 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
After 25 minutes, and then a rest for 5 and do another 25. And after 25 minutes, I was like, I think I can keep going.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think I keep going. And then I get to 40, I'm like, I think I can make it to 50. And at 50, it's like, I think I can go for 60 and see what I can do, right? Impress yourself and see what, and measure yourself, right? I've had a lot of athletes, not a lot, I've had a couple athletes do a specific cycling workout the last few weeks where I said, I want you to sit at threshold for up to, right? It's more of a measurement, but it's also getting them to have an understanding of A, what threshold is, and B, how to manage it. And said, all right, I want you to sit after these warm up and these RAM. I want you to sit at threshold for up to 70 minutes. You can hold it till 30, because as soon as you hit the lap button, you're going to go to cool down, or you're going to up to 70, right? So you're measuring things, and you're letting them also push themselves and hold on a little bit longer. And it's perfectly designed, right, for not just accumulating information from a physiological standpoint and how you can change up training and measure progress, but also from a mental and emotional standpoint. You go back in your piggy bank, and the times I go back and look at, the best races that I've had is when you get to that point to where you tell yourself, 1 mile to the next mile. I just got to make it to the next aid station. I'm not walking yet. I got 1 more mile in you. Then you run, you're like, I can do 1 more. And you make it, and you got 1 more, right? You break things down to the very successful, incremental, doable distances or times, right? If you're at mile 13 or mile 14, I remember specifically in one of my races, I was at one of my Ironman, I was running really, really well. And at mile 15, I was like, man, I want to walk. It's like, dude, I really want to walk right now. I was like, but you know what? Just make it to mile 16 and we'll have this conversation again. Mile 16. I think I can go to 17. You get to mile 17. All right, 1 more mile, and then I'll probably just take a break because I only got 8 miles. You get to mile 18, you're like, I'm pretty close. Let's just see what I can do. Right? You have these small conversations, and by doing workouts that teach you that, it teaches you to either keep going, right? But it teaches you to have real-time decision-making and ownership of your experience and how you're actually feeling. And then the most important thing you can hear, right, is that what is best for you, right? Especially when it comes to running, right? So, I do the same thing in running with some athletes in terms of how, especially for like tempo work, but then even like long run stuff. I might say, all right, Mike, here's a long run today. The long run is, hour, hour dot. And the last bit of aerobic work is, a long interval after some, intense intervals at the beginning. I might say something like, all right, you can make this interval, max 30 minutes. However, at any point before the end of 30 minutes, if you feel your form breaking down and you feel like you're going to be way more sore or doing more harm than good, then hit the lap button, cool down, and be done. And you see so many athletes injure themselves in running, right? But these insane, ridiculous long runs that they do where they are doing more damage and more harm than good. You're just crushing yourself because you think you have to go the distance, right? You lack total self-control. You lack perspective. You lack objectivity. You are not looking to get the most out of yourself. You're looking to bury yourself, right? And if you want to do anything, you can't be pulling yourself out of a grave, right? You got to be ready to roll. And by, again, allowing, and that might come at all different times of a training cycle, right? Let's say, I give that session to Mike, and, in the last week it's been snow on the ground. He wakes up, like a lot of us did this last weekend, and it was 85, right? Mm-hmm. And so his energy expenditure is higher, his RPE is higher. He's, maybe didn't fuel properly, but the workout's written, perfectly as, 1 hour and 90 minutes done. You're like, God, I got to make it through. So at the end of 90 minutes of still feeling good, he feels destroyed because he had to make it to the 90-minute mark. He had to get it done. He had to complete it. It had to be green, instead of offering a bailout. Again, not a fail, a bail, to where you can still be successful, right? Because success just isn't created from your one workout. It's because you did the workout the day before correctly, so you can do today correctly, that allows you to do tomorrow correctly. And so many athletes they fly by the seat of their pants when they bury themselves, or they go too long, or they go too hard, or they don't go at all. And layering in these opportunities to be successful, but again, also establishing a level of ownership and autonomy within each athlete to understand, like, because a coach can't see your form breakdown. A coach can't see you under fuel. A coach can't see it be 95 degrees with humidity of 70, humidity of 95 and dew point of 72. They can't see that. They can't predict that. They can't see how you'll manage it, right? They can't know how you're exactly going to feel. They wrote it, a few days in advance or a week in advance. If you're working up a training plan, it was created by somebody 48 weeks in advance, and it wasn't even created for you, right? So you just do it to do it because you think you have to. And then you wonder why your next training for the next 2 or 3 days is horrible, right? You have to allow these opportunities to be successful. And then as coaches, you have to, praise and support and encourage athletes for making their own decisions. Because guess what? On race day, you and I aren't going to be on our motorcycles riding around the course, making decisions for athletes on the run and the swim, or the run and the bike. We're not going to be there. You have to make those. And the race is where you put all your eggs in one basket to see how performance is going to be had that day. And the athletes that manage race day the best are the ones that manage everything else the best. And I've told 2 athletes this in the last two months. As I said, you, and I know this is going to sound like way counterintuitive to how most people think a coach-athlete relationship should be, but I said, you've done every single workout, every single minute the last 2 months. You're not that good, and I'm not that good. Because, and again, to clarify, it means that at some point and usually it comes from athletes who don't leave comments. They just do it. They just mindlessly do it because they think that has to be done.
Mm-hmm.
As a coach, you know that you're not perfect. And if any coach tells you they're perfect, they're lying. I'm not that good at programming, and you're not that good at perfecting everything and always being fully recovered every day. So something's got to change. You've got to be more honest with me about how things feel, because at some point your 2 to 3 to 4 weeks of obsessive greens is going to turn into a month of red because you got burnout or because you got hurt or because you're overtrained. So you've got to communicate. And because again, no coach is that good, and no athlete has a life that's that good, right? I mean, look at the professional ranks, where all they do is things professionally. They do this for a living. They've been doing it for 20 years, doing it for 15 years at the highest level on the planet, with the best coaching, with the best, sport scientists, with the best governing bodies behind them. You know what oftentimes happens? I mean, look at Gian Frodeno, Gustav Eden, Christian Blumenfeld, Ali Brownlee, Javier Gomez. They've all gotten sick. Right? Sick or hurt leading into to big events and had to bail out, right? You would think that if they were monitored 24/7, right, like they basically are by so much science and so much data, that they wouldn't get sick as much as they do, right? But you can't outsmart, right, in my opinion, type A athletes' ability to go too hard, too often, and do too much, because it's how you're wired, because you think that is what gets you enough. But in reality, enough is enough.
Yeah, and they're going, I mean, they're thinking about going all out. So I think sometimes that that their margin of error is so thin and they push it. But when we were talking about earlier was like this concept of ranges, and like you're saying, go 24 to 32 minutes or something like that. And I think those are beautiful things to think about with regard to almost every workout, because if you're trying to absolutely nail every little single piece of every number, then it just becomes an additional burden. I was thinking about when you're saying that running, man, when I know, it's just, we talked to Magnus a long time ago, and we were talking about this second wind concept. Remember that? Like, what the hell is it?
Right. Yep.
And like, to me, that's one of the most fascinating things in this sport is like, where does that come from? And when I'm running, if I'm, trying to keep that, solid zone 2, upper zone 2 thing going, and you can just feel it. And for me, it's usually just this sort of repetitive nature that maybe I'm not either built up to yet or whatever. I'm trying to hold the same effort, stride, pace, the whole 9 yards. And I can tell when I'm hitting that spot. I know that I can still drag myself somewhere, but I know that maybe that next 2-3 miles, if I do it like that, is really not necessarily the best thing for me, because you're saying, your form falls apart, and then that's when the injury type bug starts getting in there. So like, if it's depending on where I'm at, I mean, like, I should maybe be able to do it, but I'm not nailing it like I should. So I will just, like, I've really been thinking about how to pull back, right? Not, I go through strike or things with walk run and things like that, but like, I've really been trying to figure out how to pull back my run stride into a place where it's got nothing to do with pace, but just feeling easy. Where's that spot? Like, okay, I'm a little bit over it now, so can I pull back in a little bit? And if I can do that, and it's so weird, because sometimes you can get that and pull that back in. If you have the patience to do that for, like, say, a mile or something like that, then you can kind of, I feel like, rebound into that place where you were a mile earlier, that you would have ended up dragging yourself to the finish line in pain. But now your body's been like, okay, thanks for that little break. Thanks for that active recovery. Now I can go again. And I think those kind of things can really happen more than we think. And that's why I love what, that bike interval setup or mindset you're talking about, is because if you came out of the gate and had to do 10 minutes, you might put yourself in the hole that you can't get out of. But if you can start it with 5 or 4 or 6 or whatever, and then kind of back down a little bit and just be like, all right, here's what's coming. Are you ready for this? Instead of dragging yourself all the way through it and then hitting the wall, and then the next 2 or 3 intervals are just going to be screwed. So it's just a second, third, fourth wins. I mean, I think they're out there if we can figure out how to get them. And it's just always fascinating to me to think about that kind of thing. And I just think sometimes we blindly run down the railroad track and don't think about that. And then we wonder why we can't get to the end, whereas we know that we're capable.
Most athletes decide the entirety of a workout before it's begun.
Yeah.
Right. It's going to be great. It's going to be terrible. I'm going to nail these intervals. I can't do anything. Right. You know, you talked a lot about second wins. Like that's how I felt. I think I'd even talked about it like post run camp on our long day. You know, I hadn't run more than like 8 miles, whatever. I think I ended up doing like, you know, whatever, close to 20 that day on a super hard course. And I was running with the guys in the first 2 loops. Like I was struggling to keep up. Like I let him go a few times in the long gravel hill. I was like, I can't do this. I just don't feel very good. Instead of, right, blowing my gasket, burning my biscuits, keeping up with them just because, right, my ego. I just wanted to hang around, right, which is all about having the opportunity to have a second wind. You just got to be around to have it, right? You're not going to have it on the couch. And then third loop would come around and the gravel hill comes and I run the whole thing. Somehow, some way, I started to feel really, really good. And so instead of, you know, running the same pace, I was like, I think I'm going to crank it up a notch because I felt good. I made the decision in real time. I didn't decide how the whole run was going to be. I waited, right? And that's just so important, again, to understand and to feel, you know, during these workouts, especially like, you know, running and waiting for things to happen, but also, you know, understanding when it's okay to bail, right? More athletes get hurt running easy with shit form. Dadgummit. My bad. Kids in the back. Talk to your parents about that word. More people get injured running with poor form easy than running fast with great form. You see it all the time. All the time. Athletes who have underdeveloped muscles, tendons, ligaments, bone density, you know, framework, they overrun slow and then they have the worst form and then they wonder why they keep getting hurt, right? Because they have poor form. And you see it even more with athletes who, you know, like the perfect example is an athlete with a small niggle on one side of their body, you know, so they can't run fast because they're trying to recover from injury. What happens? Injury on the other side because you're overcompensating, right? Knowing when is too much. And honestly, it makes me cringe when I get screenshots from athletes in these Ironman groups of the runs that these athletes that these ill-prepared, lacking of foundational structure and movement do in preparation for an Ironman. It wonders how and then they wonder why they can't finish. They have to walk most of it on race day. Like there's way too much damage being good. And it's also, I think it's been so harmful for the sport, you know, in a lot of ways, because it's not meant to be that way. I mean, hell, we had an athlete who qualified for Boston again at Boston. She's an older athlete. Not that old. She looks like she's 32 to me. And she said, I never thought I could run that strong on all the hills and my long run be 13 miles leading into it. Right. And you got athletes who obsessively run over and run over and run over. And there's just a lot to be said again for longevity and being around long enough to make better decisions that allow for better training, that allow you to be in better shape, to do better things, right? And allow for a one-day great opportunity, right? And going back to the cycling sessions, like to allow you to go longer and feel what it's like, right? If you want to push it out 20, 30, 40 minutes, you don't do that a lot in training, right? But to do it periodically, right? Again, not every day to hammer yourself, but to periodically do it just you. Not in a Zwift race, right? Where you got other people around you and you got, you know, the energy of whatever it is, just you alone in the most terrifying place on the planet, your own head, to force yourself to keep going. To keep it, and I highly recommend doing this on the bike, not on the run. Period. Please hear that. Do it on the bike though, because it's non-impact. You're not going to hurt yourself. But just you in your own head. Can you keep pushing? because that skill and that positive experience you will take on race day is one that you will look back on and put in the front of your toolbox to look at on race day. Again, not having not having music blaring or getting pumped up or the people virtual or whatever it is. Like, do it alone, because guess what? Race day is alone. I mean, the most mentally beneficial, although it was also crushing in the moment, that a ride I ever did was when I did that century at the lab.
Mm-hmm.
Alone in a 1.2 mile circle, 100 miles with no one else. And I think it really, really benefited me. Obviously, it was a great fitness boost, but it also benefited me more greatly because I was stuck in the most uncomfortable place that's full of the most excuses, that's full of all my demons, that's full of all of my self-doubt, that's full of all my self-criticism, that's full of all of that. My own brain. I didn't have any other distractions. I didn't have any other motivation. I didn't have a finish line. It was just working through all my stuff in real time. It was worth bailing? Did it need to be bailed? Did it need to be done? Right? But still doing it safely. Right? And I've also gone out there and tried to do it before and stopped it. I think 2 years ago, I got out there and went 73 miles. It was super cold. And I was like, this is just not good. So I bailed and stopped. Right? Still a great day. But again, it's just there's so many opportunities that we could all layer into what we do and what we provide and how we want to get better to be successful and to keep this sustainable. But then most importantly, to allow yourself more opportunities to be successful, right? Because we do this for fitness, we do this for our physical health, but we also do it for our mental and emotional health. So if you constantly feel like a failure, then things are wrong. Things are wrong. You need to change things, right? If you feel like you're letting somebody down, which is still I've worked for athletes for 8-9 years and they still, will ask me like, I just don't want to let you down. I'm like, we've had this conversation 48 times. You're never going to let me down, right? Unless you cheat or unless you pour me a cup of decaf coffee, you're never going to let me down. Okay. Outside of that, I got you. Right. But so you have to feel supported. And I think that's a huge piece of the relationship and the combination of the athlete coach and not just working off a training plan is you have, as a coach, again, like the success of the athlete comes from the athlete. It comes from the hard work that they put in. It comes from their execution. Right. But the best thing they have to, on the biggest day where they want to perform the best, right? You're totally hands off. I mean, think about it. You're totally hands off. They train for 20, 30, 40 weeks and they want to do this and they want to, qualify for Boston or race an Ironman or qualify for Team USA and sprint distance or whatever it is. Like, you talk to them, you write comments, you look at their data, you program all the things they need to, you dial it in, you talk to them before race day, you talk about this but then on race day, as soon as a gun goes off, there's nothing. There's nothing. They are on an island by themselves, period. So when you give opportunities to bail out, when you allow opportunities to be autonomous, when you push them to be accountable and to own their own journey, they might not like it sometimes, but that's okay. Because what you do is you want them to feel empowered on race day to make decisions, right? Independent of your guidance. Right? You guide them, you give them the best, but ultimately it's up to them whether they want to stick to the numbers or not. Right? And that's why we always say, like, your body and what you're feeling. You can push if you want, or you can dial it back if you want, but it's your race, it's your day. This is your job. Right? But just think if you shove somebody else, onto the end of the plank to go on race day to do it all alone when you haven't prepared them to do it all alone. Right? You haven't given them the confidence, right? Confidence comes from fitness, but it also comes from personal execution and belief that you can do it with just you. Not for your coach, not for your peeps, not for your family, not for anybody else, but you have the confidence to do it because that's the work that you've put in, right? And so when you're out there at miles 80 on the bike and there's literally no one else around, right? And you're at that point where you're like, God, I'm so far away from the end. And if I stop, I'm still going to have to wait 2.5, 3 hours to get back. So I might as well just pedal my way to the end, and see what happens. Like you get stuck or you get to mile 16 in the marathon and you're like, God, I'm almost there, but I'm not almost there. This is so tough. There's nobody else around. And even the ones that are around, like, it's not that they aren't going to make or break your day. It's on you. So you got to do things and take ownership and make decisions within your training, again, that you write for yourself, that you've got from the plan or from a coach, and own it. And I just think that's it's becoming a lost skill because we have this combination of erg mode on trainers and lack of having to shift in training and this obsessive nature about I've got to do this 3 10-minute workouts perfect at this watch, or it's not going to be good enough, or it's not going to be right, or it's going to be too much, or it's going to be too little. It's become way too overcomplicated, right? Way too overcomplicated. And you marry that with lack of accountability, lack of I can layer in as many excuses as possible. It's like, it's your own race, it's your own journey, it's your own time, right? And so we talked about it before the podcast, right? You were asking me about tennis, and I've started playing tennis again. I played a little bit in college, and I picked it up again after a very long hiatus. But I was talking to you about how great it's been for my competitive nature to go out, and obviously tennis is like one of the ultimate, one-on-one sports. Right? Think about watching a Grand Slam final in front of 20,000 people, staring at one person. Against one person, not a team, not a group of 4, and got help. You barely talk to your coach. It's just you and your mind and your ability and how you're going to execute, and how, you're playing doubles and people around, and how good it's been to like put myself in competitive, challenging situations that are obviously not life or death or a race, but to work through pressures and scenarios and put yourself in uncomfortable situations. Right. And I do think it'll make me a better racer. But that's just an example of doing things, providing yourself opportunities to, again, make those decisions and and push yourself in a way that's not that you have to do before race day.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to what you said about your BQ athlete, and she said 13 miles.
Was there a long run? Yeah.
Yeah. See, this kind of thing that just resonates with me so hard. It kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about how, man, you can slog. I mean, you can slog it out, especially when you're thinking about Ironman too. I feel like you can slog that extra 7 miles out or whatever, but like it's just gonna beat you up, and it's gonna, especially if you can't control form and you have bad things going on in your body. It doesn't really matter. I think that you got to be able to get to a point where, you have good form, you have good strength. That's why I'm such a big hill person. And, like you talked about Run Camp Quick, and we can end this podcast, but I just find that so incredible that, you're talking about running 8 miles, whatever, and then knocking out 20 at Run Camp. And of course, obviously a lot of, a good chunk of that course is going to be hiking because of that. Some of the hills are just, ridiculous to try and run up, but even still, your heart rate on those hills, hiking them is probably almost at peak. And the ability to move your legs like that and sort of that in-race recovery kind of thing, or at least break from the stride, is so important. And because the same thing happened to me, it was like 3 months after the other Run Camp in November, December. And I just somehow, I didn't really run a ton, but I ended up running like the 2 loops and probably 8 minutes faster than I did in, 3 months earlier. But it's just something about finding that second wind and being able to recreate your agenda and your stride and regroup in the middle of it rather than plowing through till you got nothing. I mean, that's a race day thing, a lot of times, but I'm just saying, I think what we do is we burn out the whole cup before, like, we have an opportunity to refill it. You know what I mean? And I think that's out there in every workout too. So just food for thought on that, man.
No, I mean, you said the last thing that I was going to say, and just in a different way, was that, 13 mile runs aren't, the case for everybody, but 17 is usually the max. If that, for athletes, because it's based on time. But the reasoning behind it is twofold, but the biggest one is that the way that you layer in training is ill-prepared, undertrained, slow, broken down run form that leads you to 2:15, 2 hours and 30, God forbid 2:45 or 3 hours or 3.5, like you see some people do. Is your 3.5 hours of honestly minimal benefit besides self-destruction and damage. Multiply that by the next 72 hours, because the repair and the recovery that's needed for you to get any kind of a workout, right? Whether you believe it or not, or see it or not, or think it or not, your next 2 to 3 workouts aren't going to be very good. And God forbid you still try to hit your numbers, right? You're digging yourself into more of a hole. Let's say right now, more than 60% of athletes in Ironman start line show up overtrained. Their training metrics are so insanely ridiculous that, honestly, that's when I see, and sometimes I'll track them online when I see like these ridiculous like 20-mile brick runs or 3.5-hour runs after a 9-hour bike ride. I'm like, guarantee you finish in the bottom 5%, right? Or you could come in the race fresh and energy, because it's not about the mileage, it's about the fatigue. It's about how hard it is on your body. And you do that week in, week after week, or you do that long run and you take Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday off, and you just skip 3 days. So you spent 3.5 hours of getting really no benefit, but destroying and damaging your body, right? So you take those 3.5 days and you missed out. Even if you train only 2 hours a day, you just missed out on 6 hours. So to me, that's a negative 9.5 hour experience. You missed 6 hours because you're irresponsible. 3.5 hours, it's negative 9.5 hours, right? Then you look at the other person who runs a controlled hour and 45 or puts in some speed work and maybe runs 2 hours and covers 14 miles, and then wake up the next day and does a long, 3,800 4K swim. The next day is a bike ride and run. The next day is swimming a bike. And they get in 7.5 hours. You add that with a 2 hour, that's 9.5 hours. It's an 18-hour swing of work, where one athlete dug a 9.5 hour hole and the other one got 9.5 hours better of fitness in the bank. So when you're thinking about how much training is too much, the plan you're following, or the book you read about how much you should do and what's appropriate, think about that metric. Think about that 18-hour swing, right? And how you want to go into race day with fatigue or lack of fatigue and feeling sharp and feeling excited. We hope this podcast was exciting for you. It was exciting for us. And I only dropped one cuss word, which, to be debatable, the S word is like a fringe when it comes to cuss words now. As always, we love you. We appreciate you. Go to our website, c26triathlon.com. It's our one-stop shop for all things coaching, camps, and community. We have camps still available with a few slots. Our June camp in Nashville. Come join 40 other athletes from across the country for a weekend you will never forget, and some of the best training grounds on the planet. And then if you want to skip that and make it to our other camp, we're partnering with Garmin. That's in Madison, Wisconsin, one of my favorite cities on the planet. Few spots left for that. Check that out on the camp tab. If you want to look for ways to support the podcast and support Mike and I, go to the online store and purchase some swag. That's the best way to support us and keep it. Well, we're going to stay ad-free anyway, just a way to support us. And then if you have any questions or are intrigued or interested about coaching for the rest of this year, you can click on the coach tab and find the coach that's right for you. And if you need anything specifically for Mike, he is at CrushingIron@gmail.com. Or if you need anything from me, I'm at c26coach@gmail.com.
All right, that sounds good.
See you.
Wrap it up there. See you.